I'm going to ask Wyatt Butcher to come to the podium and talk to us about psychiatry and diagnosis and religion and culture and spirituality and a whole lot of other things. Thank you, Wyatt.
Great. That's good. You clap now because I'm not sure you will at the end. That's okay. I don't know if Di's still here. I'm not going to diss the DSM. In fact, I'm probably going to use the DSM to diss the mental health systems in this country a wee bit. I'm a chaplain in mental health, been so for 16 years, and my research journey started 16 odd years ago. I think if I just push enter, that will go to the next one. When I was asked this question in about 2003 or 4 by a psych registrar, and she rang me up and said, look, in our journal group we've been looking at some literature and we're just wondering, when we do our original assessment, our initial assessment, should we ask people about their religious stuff and whatever? And my answer, well, you'll probably work it out as it goes on a wee bit, but initially I said to her, well, what does the DSM say? Because being new to mental health, I've made the decision and read the thing, which I don't advise anyone to do. It's incredibly boring. And you actually become aware that you've got every mental illness that's conceivable known to man. But the DSM, for those of you who don't know, is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's published by the American Psychiatric Association. And it's the most commonly used manual in New Zealand to diagnose mental disorders. It's been around. Its first real big edition was put out in the 1950s, but it started way earlier than that as a collection of statistics collected up from some psych hospitals in America. It's now in its 5th edition, and each edition's had some various remakes. It's almost impossible in New Zealand to find a copy of the 1st and 2nd editions. If anyone has one or knows where they are, I would love to borrow them, because I can't access them from any library, and to do it online costs more thousands of dollars than I'm prepared to spend. But, so that's about that. So if you've got one, or you can tell me that's good. Historically, and Richard touched on it before, since Descartes, there's been a degree of antipathy between the religious world and the medical world, and it's been ongoing, and I've just got a couple of little sort of notes on that. It's been a long history of mutual scepticism, with very much an anti-psychiatry movement in the States by Jay Adams and various others. Freud characterised religion as an illusion, and people like me as having obsessive compulsive behaviour. My wife might agree with him, I don't know. And that came from a guy, Fallot, as a quote. But one of the interesting things, statistically, psychiatrists, and I hope there's not too many of you here, are the most atheist group of health professionals. And that actually has a bearing on some of the stuff I'm going to talk about in my 9 minutes remaining. The New Zealand situation, in New Zealand generally, at least in the service I work in, psychiatrists aren't good at asking about this stuff. My research, my masters sort of revealed that. So they're not good. They don't inquire a lot. If they do, they say, well, what now? That's not so much so in the alcohol and drug world. There, it's considered vitally important and asked for. So I make that sort of note there. But so, and partly because they don't have a hell of a lot of training in this mental spirituality, religion, and whatever. And that's a criticism of our system. I'll toss out there, you might disagree with me. Having said that, overseas there's been a very strong move to encourage psychiatrists to be training more, and the Royal College in Britain and the World Psychiatrists Association have both published guidelines and statements for psychiatrists to deal with spirituality and religion. And they've recommended also that it be included in the curriculum of psychiatric training. And they tell me that in the States that's becoming very much the case. So, having got that bit out of the way, let's look at the DSM. It's had a progression over the last 3 editions, and that's what I want to look at today. and just pick up on. And if we go back, edition 3 was published in 1987, and it was, as far as I can tell, the first one to start considering culture or religion within its context. And in its introduction, it had this sort of statement, which I'm not going to read out loud, you can read it, but it's very much a caution saying that, you know, if you take this middle-class white American document and apply it to someone from a different location, you may get it wrong. And that was a pretty fair document, and it sort of says, you know, if the person's behaviour is normal in their own context, so if it's normal in their own context, then again, it's probably normal, and it may not be pathological. I'll come back to that. So that was in 1987. In the same thing saying there, you shouldn't consider religious or cultural beliefs as evidence of psychosis, which I'd have to say sometimes in hospital that happens. You know, I have worked, watching my time, with people from all sorts of religious backgrounds, picking a very mainstream background in New Zealand. Pentecostal Christians in New Zealand speak in tongues and engage in spiritual warfare. I know one that was diagnosed as being psychotic because she believed that. And I had to intervene, and we managed to sort of work through that. But, you know, that's a fair true story. In 1994, the DSM was updated, and what they did in 1984 is they made the warning a bit more explicit. They said, you know, may get it wrong. They were a bit more explicit, a bit firmer and stronger in the emphasis to try and get people thinking about this stuff. And they actually put out a little list at the back of culture-bound syndromes, which we don't need to go into. If you want to, go and find them and look at them. They're not particularly exciting. But they certainly said you need to be looking at it. And they gave an outline of what a cultural sort of thing should look at. And they put down these identities. Psychiatrists should look at this. I don't know of any that actually ever did. There you go, under that system. And they're good questions. They tell you about the person. And so the DSM, the American Psychiatric Association, was giving very clear signals. We need to look at people's culture and their religion. The latest DSM takes it a bit further. It actually has 11 pages giving you guidance on how to conclude the interview and develop a cultural formulation which you can then really have good knowledge of that person. And it stops there. And I share an office with the refugee and migrant mental health specialist in Hill Morton Hospital, and I asked him, are psychiatrists doing this? And his answer was no. They are not. And he's working with people from totally different cultures. We're not doing it with people from overseas cultures, or even from our own cultures, or even from Maori, a lot of the time. It just doesn't happen. And that's really sad, because the signal's there, we should be doing this. And it's an in-depth cultural analysis, it really is. It takes in family, whānau, everything that was talked about before, actually. And so I'd like to put some concluding comments out there. But definite progress is being made in the world of psychiatry at the senior top end. 5 minutes? My gosh, I have been quick. I reduced an hour into this. It was quite an effort. So definite progress has been made. Worldwide, there's been progress. Unfortunately, my experience when I did my master's, which is 6 years ago now, was very much that the Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists did not want to know. And since then, fortunately, some younger psychiatrists have picked up on my work and are actually now got a special interest group within the Australian New Zealand College and are pursuing this. I spoke briefly at the Pan-Pacific Congress of Psychiatry last year. So that's real progress that it's occurring. there's a big move. But in New Zealand, we're actually behind the time. My master's supervisor regularly referred to my grand delusion, which I thought was quite amusing. So I just asked him how his was going, but, we've got a colonialist attitude. It was mentioned before, actually, in that psychiatry still, and I think the health system, still has this attitude, and it's deep within us, that we've got the science, we've got the knowledge, we know what's wrong, do as you're told. And actually, we need to lose that and work away slowly and develop from it. The fact that they're not doing it in New Zealand, I think, comes back to a couple of things. One, Richard Egan referred to earlier, and he said people don't feel confidence. With the young woman that asked me that first question, my first response, what does the DSM say? Her answer was, I don't know. So I said, well, you have to. You have no choice. So I actually ended up at their journal group, and we talked with them and whatever, and spent a bit of time because they had looked at a paper which I'd actually read, so it was quite useful. And their question was, okay, if we do this, what then? What do we do with the information? And we don't know how this thinking works. It's a totally... Someone talked about a lack of language. A lovely word I came across was incommensurability. Between the world of medicine and science and religion and spirituality, there's such a gulf in language that we don't have common language. And the words mean different things. So it's really very hard for someone that comes from a possibly atheistic, secular, scientific model, wrap it up, to actually change their view. So they have a lack of training in culture and religion. It's not there very much. I know that because I do a wee bit in Christchurch Hospital, and what I do is pathetic. There you go. And like most of us, people have a blindness to their own sort of preconceptions, and they don't know, people don't know what we don't know. And if you're not got an involvement in a world which is spiritual orientated, you just don't know that you don't know that stuff. And it's really hard. So that's basically my 10 minutes worth.
Let's entertain a few questions.
Yep. Mic? No mic. You'll have to yell. Yep.
No, because
they're recording it.
Forgive me, I'm not going to hog the whole conference. That was the DSM, and that was wonderful, thank you. Have you looked at all at the European manual, the OECD manual? And forgive me, I've forgotten, it's so unused, I've forgotten the name of it.
What? I have read it once, but since generally where I work it's not used at all, I haven't pursued it. There you go. And my understanding is it's not used much across the country.
Any other questions? Up here.
So now I all strongly disagree or I've stunned them in silence.
Hi there, I'm Mel McKenzie. I'm a chaplain at Victoria University. I just wanted to ask you quickly if you had to map out a few steps forward that we could take in this area that would be positive from your perspective, what might those be?
I think the most positive step forward was the inclusion of the topic in the Pan-Pacific Congress in Auckland last year, and the fact that there is a group within the Royal College of Australia and New Zealand working on it. I think the symposium is very good. I don't know, is there any psychiatrists in the room? A couple. There you go. Because basically, I mean, the change needs to come right at the core of our system in the med schools and the training and the psychiatrists themselves initially, because they probably drive the system at a clinical level. So keep on talking about it and bringing the issue up. I think this, yeah.
Thank you. That being the... Is it the end of questions? Yes, thank you.
There's one more here.
Oh, one more here.
Yep.
Yeah, good.
Tons of time.
Kia ora, I'm Bronwyn Castalma, clinical psychologist. I'm going to be presenting some of the results of my PhD immediately after lunch, but one of the findings that came out of my PhD is that clients who saw a psychiatrist as opposed to a psychotherapist or a psychologist were less likely to say that their religious or spiritual beliefs had been taken into consideration compared to when they saw those other health professionals. I had some ideas as to why that might be, but I would be quite interested to hear yours.
If I think back to my own research for my master's, I never wrote it in the paper, but my conclusion was that in New Zealand, if you want a psychiatrist to take your spiritual, religious or cultural stuff seriously, find one with a foreign accent. And that was very clear in my findings. Those who came from overseas were more likely to inquire and more likely to incorporate.
It's a very telling piece of evidence. Yeah. All right, okay, thank you, Wyatt.
You're welcome.
Small gift, again, non-monetary.
Thank you.